and welcome to the latest episode of Talking Intuition. I'm Gata Jane, and today I'm talking to Nicole Bishop, who is a tarot reader, an artist, and the co-owner of Bishop's Botanicals. So she has a kind of a range of experiences in these intersecting fields that I like to talk about on these live chats. Being an artist and an intuitive, and someone who kind of brings those practices together, both in the work she does, like her own creative work and her readings and work. So I'm excited about this conversation. We're going to be talking about how intuition informs her creative practice, and also how how her intuitive process works, and just really getting into the kind of like flow between the two. And here she is. So I will bring her on. It'll take me a second. It's always the part where I squint into the camera and press the buttons. We are waiting for Nicole. Oh, it did not work. We'll try it again. Oh, are you here?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. You told me you couldn't join.
Oh.
I can't see you though.
Oh, really?
No, you're just the
weird.
black screen, the very mysterious.
Oh, okay.
That's the other thing about Nicole. She's actually a black screen. To me, apparently. Only to me. This is actually a thing about me. I only see some people as black screens and not as humans. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Apparently you're visible to other people, which is all that matters.
All right.
Maybe you'll show up. So how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be talking to you. I wish I could see you though.
I know. I can see your face.
Oh, yeah. Everyone else can see you.
Yeah.
This is very sad. Okay. Oh, well, maybe you'll show up. I'm hoping you'll show up. So maybe if I wave to everybody, it'll fix my thing. No.
Nope.
Okay. I'm trying. Okay. Sorry. So you are, can you first start by explaining a little bit about what you do? Like you bring together, like you do a lot of things. You have a store.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you also do readings, and you also are an artist.
Yes. So many pluses.
Yes.
So I have I own a skincare company with my mom Susan called Bishop Botanicals. So we make plant-based skincare, hair care, all of that. So they're like essential oils, plant extracts, things like collagen and elastin. Like it's a lot of fun. And I am also a tarot reader, and I am also a henna artist, or jagua artist is the other medium that I've just started working with as well. So I love to do, art kind of guides the whole thing for me. And I had my own shop called 313 Spirit Shop prior to even sort of joining forces with my mom, Susan, at Bishop Botanicals. And it just sort of happened organically, where a lot of the crossover between what people were looking for in terms of like relaxation or connection or being in tune with their bodies or giving themselves what they needed, it flowed really well. So I ended up dropping 313 and then sort of like merging with Bishops, where I was offering like, and I still do, but out of the space that we had, I was doing moon circles as well, and meditations and that kind of thing, and infusing tarot into that, infusing like sometimes essential oils into that, and then and the body art as well.
And this is in Collingwood.
This is in Collingwood, yeah.
Collingwood, Ontario, Canada.
Collingwood, Ontario, Canada.
Yeah. And can you tell us, so you used to do more henna, you still do some?
Yes, yeah. So I still do some henna. The jagua that I just brought in this year, just got it to my doorstep right in time for COVID. So that was really great timing. But yeah, I just started doing the jagua. I still do some henna. The difference between the two is henna is a plant that's ground down into, like, it's dried and then made into a powder. And then I mix in like sometimes lemon juice, water, sugar, essential oils. So it's like a thick brown paste. And then the jagua is a fruit extract in South America, and it's a blue-black gel ink. So it's a lot thinner to work with, but it allows for me to do a lot more detail and that kind of thing. And it looks a lot more um, like a tattoo than the henna does, just given the color of each. But yeah.
And so, and they have different, I guess, like traditions in that. Do you work with a different tradition when you work, or is it kind of infused very much by your own practice?
Yeah, it's infused by my own practice. The henna, in terms of like the like Mendi or like the body art sort of traditions, is a really sort of ingrained practice in places like India. And there's a lot of tradition and ceremony around it. And like the hagwa is no different in terms of like South American culture. It's used in the same way in terms of like body art. There's tradition and there's ceremony that sometimes goes hand in hand with that. I really enjoy both mediums in terms of how I work with them, but I don't really incorporate ceremony pertaining to like weddings or any sort of like life stage. Really, what I use it for is a way to sort of visualize either my own intuition if somebody gives me like free reign. So I treat it like the way that I sort of connect to source, I'll say. And the way that that gets sort of visualized based on the person that I'm with. So I would sort of go with what your energy is telling me and what I'm feeling, and then I create from there just based off of size or placement and all of that. And then I also incorporate it into the tarot readings. So I'll do a tarot reading, and then based off of the message or the sort of theme or whatever that comes out of that overall, I'll work with that to create a piece that somebody can sort of walk away with and have their message stay with them and have that visual and that connection to what we sort of talked about and what they, I'll say, learned, I guess, from the experience in terms of what, you know, source or spirit or the universe is wanting them to know. So I've really sort of taken my own, I use it for my own practices and I guess my own traditions in that regard.
Mm. And how did you start doing tarot? How did you get into that?
So I was always interested in tarot and like witchcraft and all of that from like I can't remember not being interested in it. I'm 31, and at the time that I was little, there was definitely like the internet, but there wasn't a whole lot of like resources that I knew to like turn to or check out. Even from like a Google search, a lot of what I remember finding was like the lore or like the history of witchcraft or witches. But I didn't really know how to like learn it or think of it as something that I even could do because it just seemed like this kind of like fairy tale almost, how I found, you know, things were sort of like written. And then it wasn't until I was in university that I really started to explore that really seriously. There was a place, I was living in Montreal. I went to school at Concordia for art history. And a lot of the old paintings and medieval art incorporate things like people in court and tarot readings and tarot cards. And there was a place called Le Mélange Magique, or just like the magic shop, that was really close by to my residence. And so I ventured in there many times and explored candles and cards specifically because I just loved the visuals. And at first I was just using them for art pieces. I was doing collage. So the first deck I ever bought was the Visconti tarot, the like Italian with like gold, very like Renaissance type looking. And I essentially like cut it up in order to create like an art project just for myself. And then it wasn't until I kind of explored it from like an art perspective and just being really fascinated by the visuals and the fact that like you could get all of these different decks with different artists and different interpretations on color or message or whatever, that I just really fell in love with it. And then it wasn't until I was in corporate a few years ago that I really started to dive into it. And I reached out to Alejandra Leon, who has the Lioness Oracle Tarot. as a decorator, and she's in California, and spoke with her, and I ended up doing lessons with her, and she gave me a lot of really great feedback and tips, and went through the whole deck with me. And then I just sort of like really got into it from there with my own, journaling, and just deepening my sort of connection to the cards and their messages from there out.
And so when you talk about being like being interested in it, what did that actually feel like? I'm interested in how that sort of being drawn to this. I feel like that's a common story of feeling drawn and feeling interested. And it's like was it a different kind of interest, or was it like a very mental interest, or was it something that you felt like pulled to in a deeper way?
I felt pulled to it for sure. It felt like it felt tingly. Like that's the way I can describe it, where it's just sort of like it felt not it didn't feel forbidden. It wasn't anything like that. It was just so unknown to me. Like I didn't know anybody who was into tarot cards. I didn't know anybody who would have said out loud that they were into witchcraft or practicing any kind of divination, or, even use the word pagan in a positive,
Yeah.
so it just felt like it didn't feel like a bad thing, but it just felt like this thing I couldn't ignore. Like it just felt every time I thought about it, or in the context of even like witchcraft or anything like that, I just felt this like inevitable, like I knew I was going to find it at
Yeah.
some point. Like I just knew it was going to connect. It was just a matter of, I guess, when. It just felt like I was always hovering around it or hovering over it until I finally like just like dove right in. And then there were so many things that came up in my path. Like even in my first year of university, I was 18 and I was exploring. I mean, you're exploring so much. Like you're away from home, at least in my case I was. And you're sort of learning how to navigate life for the first time. And I was in a major that I loved with art. And then exploring like so many sides of myself, exploring myself through art, mainly from other people's, because I was in art history. So you're, using other people's visuals as your sort of guide into self-discovery. And then finding like the magic shop that I lived so close to. And then in my last year of I guess my third year of university, I met my friend Catherine, who we ended up living together for both of our like last year of university. And she was the first person I ever really met who was like an open pagan witch, etc. And so it just felt like such a sign in that way, like just my connection with her, but also just more of a push to like dive in even deeper, because she had books and she was full of information. She was a part of the pagan society at the school, so it went from like 0 to 100 real quick. But it was amazing because she introduced me to another friend of hers, who was into the same realm of spirituality and art and all of that. So it was really, really cool. It was a neat sort of like build up in terms of like, once I had sort of found it and claimed it, all of these things started to sort of come my way through that process.
And what were those first experiences like for you? You talk about exploring with journaling and like with using the cards initially in art. Did you have experiences that felt very much like, oh, this is like, the sort of when intuition sort of jumps out of just feeling like a normal experience? Did you have moments like that at the beginning, or was it initially a deepening into yourself?
It just, yeah, like it all just really clicked. Like it just made so much sense. There was never a point that I had in dealing with the cards or reading any books that ever made me kind of go like, oh, I don't know if this is for me, or oh, maybe this isn't. Like I never had that questioning. Like everything just made so much sense. And the more I learned about the cards in particular, even like the iconography, because I know it's like it's labeled the beginner deck, like the Rider Waite or like the Smith Waite, but they're my favorite just because the iconography in it is so rich in terms of like the colors mean things. Every little symbol, every number, there's some sort of meaning behind it. And so as an art history kid, like the nerdy level just went like through the roof in terms of like, oh, the red represents this. And like, you know, the compare and contrast between cards, like it was kind of a dream in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all just really clicked, and like learning more about what each card meant and the message and the layers. I just remember thinking like time and time again, the more that I like pulled cards and journaled with them or meditated with them, it just made me think like, why didn't I discover this so much sooner? Why did I resist this for so long? And I feel like everybody should incorporate some sort of element of this into their daily routine, or just their routine in general. Just have a deck of cards, because it's just, it can tell you so much about yourself or make you think about things differently, and it's all very rooted in what's here and what's around us and who we are. But I think it helps to clarify but also question in a very like beneficial way.
And now your process is very like is mixes, right? You use some kind of like intuitive channeling, like you receive messages at
Mm-hmm.
the same time as referring to the cards.
Yes. Yeah, it happens like I've embraced it a lot more. In some ways, I used to kind of be like, you know, there's certain things that I was just like, oh, I don't know where that came from or what that has to do with maybe this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to kind of sidestep that. And then things, you know, reveal themselves as like, oh,
Like it would just occur to you, something would just appear and you didn't know where it had come from.
Yeah, in some ways.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll just say like, in this, you know, whatever the cards are on the table, whether it's like 1 or, 15, it's just like if I get something sort of in my head or something that I'm feeling or something that's sort of coming to me in terms of like what I'm supposed to let this person know, I kind of say like, well, and I'm also hearing X, Y, and Z. So that can kind of come through. And I found that that is something that's just sort of expanded, I guess, over time. Just like the more you listen, the more you sort of tap in, the more you sort of trust that it's, I don't want to say like the right thing to say, because that doesn't sound as accurate as what I'm trying to say, but it's just, it's okay to say. And sometimes like those things that you have the urge for, you might think come from nowhere, but it's not really about you in that moment. It's more about that person receiving that or digesting that.
Yeah. It's like you mean it's like that feeling of something that doesn't necessarily mean anything to you. You don't know why you're saying it, and sometimes you don't know like you don't know if it's going to be a meaningful thing before you say it.
Totally.
But often people will know why you've said it once you've said it.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I get messages like in the moment where people are like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. That's just, there you go. And then I'll get sometimes messages afterwards being like, oh, it's like, yeah, okay.
I know the messages often, like when you hear things, does it come as ideas or does it come as sounds or is it images or is it just sort of a mix for you?
It's kind of, I guess it's more in line with like an idea. Like it pops into my head as like a clear thought. So it's almost as if I'm like literally getting the like ticker tape message of like something being typed across the screen or just somebody saying something to me. Like it's more so that way of coming around. I don't really see colors or anything like that when it comes to, people or channeling or reading. But just definitely sometimes these things where it's like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, okay, I will say blah, 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 blah.
You didn't have, you didn't grow up with a background that sort of like suppressed this in you, or like some people grow up very religious or they, as I did, grow up quite skeptical. Did you have any like reason to doubt or like keep yourself from it?
It was 100% myself and just what I thought it would be perceived as or how it could be. Because again, it was just very much like the access to information or the idea that people were tarot readers or practiced anything that wasn't like an organized religion, like a Christianity or anything like that. Just felt in my own mind totally out of left field. Like the only other witches I saw were on TV, and it was very like, they snap their fingers and the door opens. you know,
Yeah.
and that type of thing. So it just felt like to say, well, that's what I want to be, or that's what I feel like I am, felt like in my mind to rationalize that. I was like, but I'm not
It's very
Matilda.
like it's very
Yeah.
clearly once you're sort of like talking to actual people who practice like any of these things, witchcraft, psychic work, and then you could sort of go back to a mainstream television show, even just like meditation.
Yeah.
Like you'll have these things, and then suddenly people will talk in a soft voice and sound really delusional.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I've talked to anybody who sounds like that, like
No.
ever. Or even sometimes just like, oh, they wanted to talk about their emotions.
Yeah.
That was really out there. Like,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. No, 100%.
It's very strange. I don't know. Like it's very strange how it's just like complete like every single show that you see. And then the ones that do represent these practices are very much like this is a thing that sort of exists in this very like strange house over here that you can
Yeah.
walk to. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But I guess that's like that makes a good case that like, if you suppress something for long enough, it'll really like feed into the culture. This suppression, like people will just have this story that feels like the most natural story to tell.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Totally.
So going back to like how you work, when you do you use intuition in like the creation of the body art itself, right? Like, do you feel like that is a similar process to when you're doing readings, or do you feel like that's like does that feel different to you?
It's kind of both, I guess. Both feel like an extension of myself. Like I feel really deeply connected to both aspects. And I see in my, I guess, realm or how I view both, they're so connected to me. Um, you know, we learn about ourselves through art in so many ways. And that's sort of what I think of tarot as. Like tarot, I see as such like an art form in itself. But I just see like the actual visuals of every card and every creator as such an art piece as well. Like I find you pick up a deck from somebody and you learn a little bit about them in terms of how they view certain things, whether it's an oracle deck or a tarot deck, and their experience of tarot or just life in general, and their personality comes through the colors that they choose or the figures that they choose. If they call, you know, a card the hanged man or the hanged woman or the hanged being, like there's just so many levels there to be able to explore others. And we can learn so much about ourselves through that process. And I find like the body art for me, I have the same feeling on that, except it's sort of like, it's instead of having like a roadmap to work off of with the decks and learn from others through that process. It's like a totally unique process to me and that individual. So I have a certain style as an artist.
I can't hear you. I think I might have lost you. Hi.
Can you see me?
I can see you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. That losing you and rejoining means I'm no longer talking to a black square.
Yay.
That's nice. I like looking at your face. I feel like also I'm sort of like staring around and like.
Fantastic. I can't see you now, but I'm.
You can't?
No.
Are you serious?
No, I'm serious. But it's not. It's just like load. It's like the thingy is spinning to like let me in. So it's cool. But if you can see me,
okay.
I'm back on.
We'll alternate. We can't see
we'll
each
just
other
keep
at
doing
the
this.
same
That'll
time.
be great.
Why
Yeah.
would you be able to?
Oh my
So
gosh.
what's interesting to me is it sounds like you have this very rich understanding of the symbol system, like, and of the layers of the symbol system. Like as you're talking, I'm hearing this sense of like oh my God, it's so much easier being able to see you. I feel like the layers of like you're talking about the colors, the images, the language, the description, like it feels like it's this sort of elaborate system that has like these levels or like interlocking pieces that you understand, and then by sort of seeing like it's like your brain almost can piece these together and then pull out like these clear insights by understanding almost like these different levels. Like the color level is separate from maybe the language level, but somehow the intersection of them is also partly how you pull out meaning. Is that true?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's why like my favorite deck to read with, so I have a bunch of decks in my collection, but my favorite deck to read with is the Smith-Waite. For that reason, just because of the iconography, and that's 100% like that's my art history. I'm glad I went to 4 years of school for for art to have it apply to tarot reading. But it's, I mean, I find that funny too, just how those things like, you know, I never knew at that point what I would be doing, obviously full time for a living, and it's just amazing to me how like how much it makes sense and how much it fuels what I do with tarot.
Mm-hmm.
But I just find, yeah, like I love breaking the imagery together and then putting it back together, or like breaking it apart, putting it back together, and then like looking at the other cards and how like the two favorite cards I love pulling out are like the Lovers and the Devil in that deck, because it's the same card where one really depicts freedom and one really depicts like being chained, or the sense of like being confined. And I love that that works that way. And what I love and the way that I read with somebody is I kind of go through that with them, because I get a lot of people who it's their first reading ever, or they're just venturing into spirituality, or they're just curious or whatever. And then I will get like repeat clients out of that. But what I've noticed is that for the people that do come see me, I'm a lot of people's first time ever. And so what I love to do with that deck, because it's so easy to digest and I can walk somebody through it, is like I like to go through the imagery and the cards so that they can connect to not only what I'm telling them, but they can see the relationship that they have in terms of what I'm telling them to each card, whether it's about them or about a part of their life, and how maybe that color red really resonates with them, or the way that the man, you know, in the King of Wands is depicted, and how that really speaks to like their partner, or like aspects of who they are, or their job and their boss, or like whatever it is. And that's sort of where like my love for all of those like details in terms of color and symbol and all of that, I find is for me how I love being able to connect to people and have them connect to their message in the cards.
That's really cool. So you're actually sort of bringing people into an understanding of the form at the same time as,
Yeah,
as giving the reading.
totally.
It's really it's something that I came to doing direct intuitive readings, so I just kind of tune into the people. Initially I would like just pull up images from holding my hand over a picture, so it's like I started learning about tarot after kind of already having all these things happening in my head. So I will like my experience of it is as something that's very like analogous, and but I don't really understand because so much of what I do is just happening inside me. So but it's really interesting, like you did a reading for me a couple of weeks ago, and it's really interesting to see how you can get these insights through this completely different process.
Yeah.
Like when I do a reading, I'm just like, okay, this is like, I'm just like, this is what's happening in your energy field. This is like what I feel like is happening in your head, sort of thing. But then when you do a reading, like you start with the cards. And I know this is how tarot works. I feel like I'm being very pedantic. I'm like, so you have cards, and then you put them on a table,
Yeah.
and then you look at them. But it's interesting because it does start to pull out these scenarios. And what it feels like to me with a tarot reading is that the scenarios, the scene, the actual sense of the person's life almost emerges from this general picture in a different way. Like it does also feel like it comes to messages quite quickly when you work. Like I feel like my sense of how you work is that you start to pull out areas, but you're describing like what is like the tension in the area, and what needs to be done fairly quickly out of seeing these images. Do you find that? Is that your feeling about what you do?
Um, I guess so, yeah. I kind of sometimes it takes me a little bit longer with other people. Um, it just depends on how open somebody is. Um, because I don't want to say I'm feeding off of your energy. That sounds scary, but I'm working with your energy to pull your
Well,
message
when you say you
to
don't want to say, do you mean you don't want to admit, or you don't want to? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
you. Yeah.
No,
Sounds
it's
like
very energizing. I can promise. It's very energizing to have a reading with you.
oh good, yeah.
It's not an energy drain at all.
Feeding off of your energy. And I've had people be very like extremely closed off, where it's almost like they're there to like they're very cynical, like they don't believe in any of it, and so they're almost just like, show me what you can do, and it's like, well, this is not going to go well, you know. Like if you aren't going to actually listen or kind of put yourself into the experience, then that sucks. But I find with that it takes a little bit longer to kind of penetrate, because there's
Right.
areas and there's guards that people have up because they don't necessarily want it to appear.
Right.
And then with other people, I've put the first card down and there's a reaction that they have, whether it's tears, whether it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like even if they've never dealt with tarot cards before, it's like even watching their intuition or their knowing when they see that card come down. And sometimes that's enough, especially somebody who's really timid, to just like open them right up. And then it's really, I don't say it's really easy, but it's just, that's where all of a sudden I find that flow, because they've let the guard down enough that we can start to like work together.
Yeah.
And that's really how I see it. It's, we're on this journey together. Like we're going through the experience of the reading together, which is why I like to kind of like explain and have them to connect to the cards, because it's, as much about, like, I guess they're like there to see me, but it's really about them. So whatever they get out of it, and what they, tell me, or what they, like I said, like in terms of those guards or that like, cynical aspect, if that all kind of comes down, then we can get somewhere together. So it depends on the person. And I find, with other readers, because I've had a reading with you as well. So I've been read by other readers, and I've read for obviously other readers. And that's like, a totally different experience, because like you're already tuned in and you're already open. So yeah, it totally depends on the person. But I just kind of roll with it. And sometimes as soon as I see the first card, I'm just like in this zone where it's like, I can feel it.
Yeah. There's a comment from Muesli13. Nicole's intuition knows me better than I do.
Nice. That's cute.
It's funny though. I feel like I am often in the opposite situation with readings, where people will come and they have an easy, like I am still such a doubter. Like if I don't do a reading for 2 weeks, I just go in and I'm like, whoa, this still works. Like, yeah. I don't get it. Yeah. I'm still so confused. And I think if it wasn't so precise and accurate consistently, I would find a way to just disbelieve it, because I still have this emotional struggle. It's just hard for me. But I sometimes find like I like to describe people's inner experience in a way that really resonates for them at the beginning of a reading. And part of the reason I do that is just to show them that I've tuned in. Right. And I've had experiences where people will start by asking me questions that they don't already know the answer to, or like they'll want to get very quickly into something that's a little bit more out there than just what they feel all the time. And I will find that very stressful, because I'm like, I haven't proved myself to them. They just trust me? Why would they just trust me? Like, I'm like, okay, it's okay. I'm still like, it's not that I'm saying things that I don't like, I'm not working within my intuitive process. I just have a lot of trouble when people just trust me, because I'm like, I don't think that's a reasonable way to treat it. An intuitive you've never been to before. I don't know. I like to prove myself. And then I think maybe that's a waste of time for the clients, like when I'm telling them things that they know about themselves. But I also think that one of the things that's specific about what I do is it's often like the things that people are most excited about are the ways they get to understand themselves from
Yes.
my reading. They're like, oh, okay, I see why I do that. I see. I've had people say things like, oh, I know that about myself, but I never could articulate it. So I didn't understand why I was doing it that way, or like why that seemed important to me,
Yeah.
or what that feeling was.
Totally. I think and that makes sense because I go through the same thing because it's almost like going to the gym. Not that I've done that in a while, with COVID.
Yeah, but
But I
that's
just
just
describe
being
it
a
as,
good citizen.
yeah, I just describe it as a muscle. So I go through the same thing, like you do a reading, like reading after reading. And sometimes like people have said like with markets, like you would think like with one person after the other, like, how do you do it? Like, do you ever run out of steam? And it's like a friend described it to me as like a reader's high where you're just like chugging through and then like you'll go through like this like week-long period or whatever it is without a reading, and then you're just like somebody will book one and you're like, I don't know if I can, like maybe I've lost it. But I think we're just, and from what you said with how you work with people, and I relate to that in the sense of like I think we're just creatures of self-doubt. Like we just doubt ourselves so much that it's like with our abilities and like what we did last week, and it's like, can I still do that? Can I still tap into that? Am I still going to be able to like do X, Y, and Z? Because I certainly experienced that because we're just human. And then I think for people too, it's like, because I get the same thing where they're just like, I felt that about myself, or I know that that's the right thing to do, or like whatever it is for them, but you just doubt yourself so much that to
Yeah.
just have this like person that you don't know at all, especially if it's like somebody that you've never seen before in terms of like having a reading with them, tell you all of those things that you either know you have to work on, that you've kind of been pushing down, or all of those things that like you are strong, you are capable, you are, or like whatever else comes out, or that you're on the right path. And that confirmation both can be really emotional because it's like maybe they don't have anybody that they not necessarily trust, but just somebody who doesn't have to be invested enough to just tell them what they want to hear, or somebody that's just like, you know what I mean? And so I
I
think,
think it's also because it comes through an intuitive process. It's not something that you've talked about.
right.
So like it's if somebody asks you for advice and they lay out the scenario, then even the way they're talking, all of these things can be biasing you. But I find sometimes you'll pull things out and you'll be like, well, here's this situation, here's what it's like, and if you do it this way, it's going to turn out this way. And people will have that feeling, but it's the sense that it comes through this other, it's like checking it against another information source, because you're generally getting your information from a different source than from the things they've already thought. I think, I mean, sometimes maybe you're getting the information from what they think, but I think that like that you feel that, at least I in my process feel that as this is how they're feeling about it, and
Right.
then this is how I read, like it's a separate space when I read the energetic energy of the situation. So I think that coming, or if you're doing tarot, you're pulling the information you're getting from this sort of like or magical ordering, for lack of a better term, of these cards. You're pulling it from this intuitive and this systematized process that gives you another source of information. So I think it genuinely is a confirmation. Like I think when you like you can use intuition to confirm intuition if you do blind readings, for example. Like if you want to check your intuition on something and then you ask yourself the same question over and over again, but mix it in with other questions and don't let yourself know which question you're answering, and you're consistently getting the same answer over and over again on blind intuitive tests, that's a way of using intuition to check. And I think that that's partly how people use readers, is to check things.
I would agree with that.
And then to go back to what you said about self-doubt, I think that's really true that there's a self-doubt, but I also think that it's a different mental process. Like when you're doing things in the world, like whether you're going out and taking care of things in day-to-day life, you're just not necessarily using the intuitive brain. So to me, it just feels like it's over there. And anything that's not, I'm not in that process, I'm just like, oh, does that still exist? I don't know. I don't know if that's true for you. Like, do you have a very strong sense of like different mental spaces, or is it just like in different experiences? I mean, like doing tarot and being in that reader's high, that's an experience.
Right.
But are you very conscious of like your own processes to go into that experience?
Yeah, I go through, because I also have anxiety, so I go through like an anxiety period where I think I hold it in really well, but like under the surface, it's just like, "Wah, like what am I doing?" In some cases with markets specifically, because there's so many people and people are curious and all of that. But I've always had amazing experiences. It's the overthinking part going into it. So I go through this like crescendo pretty much every single time where I get really hyper paranoid in terms of like, do I have my incense? Do I have my deck? Do I have, all of these things? Even like here, like even in Collingwood, like at the shop, or whatever. It's like, do I have this with me? Do I have that with me? I go through all of these sort of like freak out, am I prepared moments. And then all of a sudden, it's like my brain just like clicks over. And like once I'm, burning, my like dried cedar, or once I'm burning my incense or whatever it is, or using like, at markets, I have a cleansing mist instead of like a something that burns and smokes, like with essential oils and stuff in it to sort of clear the air and help me ground. And like once I get into that like motion of actually like doing those physical aspects and those physical steps in terms of like getting the cards out and then lighting things, like I feel really connected to that sort of like ritual aspect of pretty much anything. Like my morning routine is like my morning ritual getting ready for the day, or my nighttime ritual in terms of like being able to put my head down and actually fall asleep at night. And I really have that sort of like the act of doing that I connect with going into any kind of reading as well. So it's like I go through like the freak out period, and then it's just like there's like this click where it's like, okay, I'm actually like working myself into it and setting the space not only for the other person, but really also for myself. So that's the biggest part of my process, is just that, definitely like smoke helps me, having water or tea with me, like having that water element with me as well. Kind of, I guess, all of them in a sense. Like I just find it very calming in a very like very simple way, like a glass of water, a cup of tea, my incense or like dried cedar or herbs or whatever that I can burn to sort of cleanse the space, but also myself, and the cards, and then sort of move into it from there.
And do you feel the shift in the space? Like, are you do you do it until you feel the shift, or do you have a specific like ritual and you do it in the same exact way? What I'm trying to ask is like if you're cleansing something and there's something like and you feel it's a more like difficult energy, do you cleanse it differently, or or is the routine the thing?
I have my little like intro routine that's pretty much the same every single time in terms of like sitting down, where I put the cards, like the initial sort of like cleanse, I'll say, with smoke or water, depending. And then as I go through it, I've made shifts. So it's like sometimes I'll like smoke the deck and then I'll do it again, depending on if I still feel somebody else's energy on it, especially if it was somebody that maybe had a really strong energy or really heavy energy. And then I might, I've sometimes like taken my herbs or my incense and fully like done the person sitting in front of me. So I kind of make shifts here and there. I try not to overthink it, because I've had that happen to me as well, where all of a sudden like my brain will click over to like that, like, okay, I'm in the ritual space. And then for whatever reason, it can like has sometimes like clicked back out almost in terms of like, wait, I don't have this, or wait, did I actually do that? And then I have to almost like take myself back to like that initial process and like remind myself, okay, like here are the steps. So in some ways I try to really stick to that, like sort of like initial, this is what I do to get into the zone, I'll say. And then I will sometimes venture out of it, but I try not to deviate too much, because then it just becomes like, it gets away from what I'm actually trying to sort of.
So you're trying to prepare yourself, like even in the cleansing, the set of steps is really preparing your feeling and approach to doing the reading.
Totally. Yeah.
It's interesting. The Total Mom Show asks, what about music or like Indian flute music or sound? Do you use any music or sound?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I am trying to remember who told me about this. I've gone to other circles and worked with other practitioners. I love being able to just sort of like receive as well, for so many reasons. I mean, I think we all really need it, and it's such a great learning experience as well. And so somebody told me along my journey about solfeggio. It's a I believe it's an Italian word, and it's like different sound frequencies, and they help get you into a sort of like a relaxed state. So my favorite thing to play in a reading or in any kind of like meditation that I do is the solfeggio. There's all kinds of different playlists on YouTube, and also Spotify. I would imagine Apple Music. I just don't have it to know what's on there. But yeah, solfeggio, and I think it's SOLFEGGIO if you're searching for it. I know some people like to play like sound bowl stuff maybe in the background, or like you said, like the flutes, which I also think are really pretty. I just really connect with the solfeggio sort of like frequencies myself, and I find it really grounding for me. So that's what I play, yeah, during a reading or during a meditation.
And do you do some online readings, or are you doing more online now, or?
I'm doing more online now, and that I really didn't do it that much prior to COVID, just because the I mean, I was doing lots of markets as well, so I was kind of in different areas, so I was more accessible if people. Like for example, like we're living in Kitchener and I was doing a market there, they could just come see me. Even if it was like a shorter one, I've had people come see me at markets because I've never ventured like too far out of our sort of like general area in terms of like Collingwood, Toronto, Kitchener, Waterloo, like sort of region. So I've had people that I've met in like Elora drive to Collingwood, to come and get a reading in person. I've offered online, but they want the experience, and honestly so do I. Like I really love reading in person when it's accessible, but especially with COVID, some people who are clients of mine who live in Toronto, it's just easier for them to like just not risk like leaving their apartment or moving around too much. So I've done more online this year than I ever have before.
Do you find it's quite different for you, or do you find it missing when you do it online?
I mean, it's nice to be able to do it. It's nice to be able to, you know, see people's faces that I wouldn't be able to necessarily otherwise see if they can't make it to Collingwood or couldn't make it to Kitchener or, you know, whatever. I really like the interaction of in person. I love being able to, like, part of my process in terms of how I read is I get the other person to shuffle the deck. I shuffle it for a little bit until I feel connected to it and kind of grounded and like in the zone, and then I pass it to them to get their energy on the cards and for them to get connected. And so we're going through this, like I almost like incorporate them into a little bit of that ritual aspect, once I've sort of done my own. And so with doing online, that gets missed with them being able to sort of connect in that way. So I do like doing online. It's definitely, I find it's more like clockwork, I guess, in a way, where it's like somebody's like, okay, I've got, you know, my half an hour, I've got my hour slot. And then they kind of go back to their life because they might be in their living room and their kids are there, you know what I mean? Whereas like when I was doing in person, especially when they were coming into Bishop Botanicals, to do it, and I still do in person, it's just like more frequently with that. And it's like, I would make them tea or like a glass of water, and like, you know, they would ask some questions. Like there was more of a like intimacy component.
Yeah, it's like a whole experience.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
totally. So nice. I miss that, doing that, more so now, because you have to be careful with like, you know, do I give them tea? Like do we touch hands? I don't know. Like yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's something I'm kind of, as you're talking, I'm sort of envious of your ability to like have these things to do with your hands. When I do a reading, I draw,
All
but I
right.
really just do that to have something to do with my hands. And I think that there's something like, as you're talking about having this sort of like whole physical space, I'm realizing that when I do a reading, it's like I'm not in my body really, so I'm just talking, and I know I like move around and I like look and I'm always like I send people recordings and I'm always like there's just a recording of me being like and like shaping the energy in my whatever, and it's like because I'm describing and always like describing the energy flow and like it's a sense of this and then it becomes something more tangible as I go on. But there's something so nice about having these things that are grounded in the real world in a reading. And I feel like I try to do that with drawing. And as you're talking, I'm realizing, oh, I really draw basically so I have something to do. And it's not like I always talk about settling into the energy, which is true, but it's also partly about just like settling my arms down
Yeah.
so that I'm just like I have a focus and then I can kind of start talking to a person from the energy. It's like it's very different for me to be giving a reading than to have a conversation, and it'll be sometimes it's very like very strong dichotomy between like I'll be having a normal conversation with a person, sometimes even a very good friend, and we'll be talking and then I'll do a reading and it's a totally different set of information. Like I'll be describing
Right.
like, oh, this person that you're seeing, well, they have a brother and their brother's like this, and you know it'll be like quite like precise, and I'll be like, I didn't like I talked to them for 2 hours. I didn't know any of that. We weren't talking about any of these things. And
Yeah.
then I switch into reading. And I can flow. Like sometimes I'll be half talking, half reading. But if I'm just talking, which I try to do especially in a lot of professional situations, I try to like not read people because otherwise I'm frustrated by all the things that you, like I'm like, oh, I feel like you're feeling this way, but it's not appropriate in this context to tell you how you're feeling. So I won't. So I just
Yeah.
try to stay in a conversation. But I feel like that what you're talking about is like this way of almost like the cards and the ritual and the tea becomes this way of like grounding the relationship or like bridging the spaces in a way. That's what it's feeling like to me. I don't know. Do you feel that way about it?
Totally, totally. It's like, I I guess in a sense I've turned people away before from readings, because I want people to feel comfortable. Like if they're uncomfortable in any capacity or they don't want to fully give over to the experience, in a way where they feel safe and secure, which I know it's a tarot reading and to say like, for them to feel safe, but it's true because it can be so emotional. Like it's a very vulnerable thing to do to go, I think, into any reading because don't necessarily know what that reader is going to pick up on.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you've experienced, but I've had people who I've told like now is not the right time for whatever reason. Like maybe something very heavy has been extremely fresh and like extremely recent, where it's like, yesterday something happened, or like, 2 weeks ago, and they're still in this like very emotionally um, tough spot, I'll say. And it's like now is not the time for a reading. You might think that it is because you need that like emotional understanding or support, but I think it's just adding too much on your emotional
Mm-hmm.
plate in some ways. Like just sort of like go through the motions and then start to like think about,
Yeah.
how to make things fit. And I've also, and again, I don't know what you've gone through as a reader, but I've had people who have had horrible experiences with readers. Who have told me, like things that came up in readings where it's just like they felt uncomfortable and it got really uncomfortable. And some of the things like that they were told have never left them and have really like affected them deeply in like not a great way.
Mm-hmm.
And to those people, I say as well, I've done the same thing where it's like, if you don't feel comfortable, then don't do it right now. This is not something that you have to do. And if you don't feel like I'm the right person to do that with, then you don't have to have a reading with me. I want you to enjoy yourself. And so I think that whole aspect of like having that person, in person, that we can, get to know each other a little bit and like have a cup of tea and just sort of like relax and ground together, I just find is great for me in terms of being comfortable with their energy, and then for them to get to know me a little bit, to be able to say like, you know, I trust this person, I feel comfortable with them, because it is a journey that we're both going to go on together. You know, some of the stuff that comes up might be like extremely vulnerable, and sometimes maybe your family or your partner don't know this side of you for whatever reason. And then, you know, that's something that you show to me during that tarot reading. And so, you know, I take that seriously in terms of, you know, I want them to understand that like it doesn't leave the room, you know, and all of that. So I do find that you know, that connection in terms of like the tea and all of that is really important to how I read, but also how I want somebody to feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important to have a sense of trust. And I think it's also like what you're saying about not some people maybe in certain moments not being ready. I think that sometimes readings can give you more to process. Like it's not always like sometimes readings can help you resolve things, sometimes readings can help you sort of like move past things, but sometimes it can be like it can be like, oh, let me pull up a bunch of things
I know.
that maybe you weren't directly dealing with, but probably should.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, I should go and deal with that. I feel like I do that a lot. Like I will, um, if there's something that feels like it's sort of dragging or pushing on people and they're not dealing with it or they're not addressing it, it will feel like very strongly in their energy. Sometimes it's another person, like they might have an ex who's like, I've had experiences where I'm like, okay, you have an ex-boyfriend and they feel this way to me, and I think they're still in your energy field and they're still sort of affecting your current relationship, or even just like the way that they process emotions or like past events from like childhood and the emotional baggage that they're carrying from them. Like I sometimes I've gone to start readings and I feel like the only thing I'm getting is like, let's start with like this really sort of deep, emotionally troubling thing. And I keep thinking, well, could we start with something else? So I'll like spend a really long time like circling, like, do you want to start with a question? Give me something. And then I'm like, okay, I'll just like, this is, if I don't like, I'll only get so much at the beginning and then I'll fill it out.
Right.
And so I'll start with this, like, okay, well, let's just go into this thing you're not over and and are not currently thinking about, but we're going to spend the night talking about it. Like, kind of, and in my experience that has gone well. Like the people have ended up, like, we've had very good conversations and the clients have gone away seeming to feel very positively about it. I think it's more in my head, it's like, is this really how I want to open this interaction with someone? But
I resonate with that deeply. Yeah, I know. Like, yeah, I've had like sometimes like the first card I turn over on the table and I'm just like, oh, okie dokie. We're getting right into it. We're just going to get right into it. Yeah.
Yeah. I just realized we've been talking for an hour. So, it's been so nice to talk to you. I've enjoyed this.
Yes, this has been so great. That hour felt like 10 minutes. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was like 10 minutes where I couldn't see you and then 5 where I could. That was
I know, and I've had like now not being able, I still can't see you, but that's okay.
Oh, no.
I got to see you for a little bit, so it's only fair. Exactly.
Well, can you just take a minute and like, tell people where they can find you, how they can get a reading, like how they can get the art done on their bodies?
Yeah, for sure. So you can go to bishopbotanicals.com. So right on our website, there is all kinds of ways to like contact or what have you. But Instagram is great too. So it can either be through the Bishop Botanicals Instagram, which is just literally like at Bishop Botanicals, or just through my own account. So this would be like Nicole Intuition. And you can just send me a DM, or I've got my email on there as well. If you want to book either online or in person, either is totally fine. For the tarot, obviously, the jagua or the henna, I would need you physically in front of me to be able to make that one work. But yeah, so like Instagram or bishopbotanicals.com. Or even, I guess, on my website, NicoleIntuition.com. that can work as well.
And yeah, thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
joining. And like I recommend following Nicole. She has a great Instagram page, and she also has some really interesting interviews that she has up on her own website. So if you're looking to find people sort of in this community, she has some profiles of different people. Actually, that's how I came across you. Is you've done a profile of White Owl Mystic Elfie.
Yeah.
If you're looking to kind of learn more about people or connect with like what's going on in this kind of community, I like check that out as well. And if you want to get a reading with me, you can do that through Instagram. Just send me a message. I have a direct booking link, and you can also, if you want to support the work I'm doing, the thing I would love is to if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I'm starting to put more content up there. So I'm hoping to see more people over there and kind of hear what you want to see and what I can do there that would be useful. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank
It was
you
really
so
fun
much.
to talk to you.
You too.
And we'll be in touch soon. Leave any questions, comments, and if you have questions for Nicole, we can pass them along and follow up in comments, because I'd love to kind of keep this conversation going with anybody who's been watching.
For sure.
Bye. Have a good night.
You too.